Good morning, everyone that's out there. We're just setting up our PowerPoint to get things started this morning. And do you want to confirm quick with Megan that she's all, things look good and everything? Thanks for joining us this morning. We're just getting the technology all set up. We're happy that you're out there. Great. Sounds like everything is all set up great and ready to roll. Well, thank you for joining us this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm Kristen Poppleton, and I'm the Director of Education for Climate Generation and Will Steger Legacy. And also with me today is
Josna Harris, and I'm the Public Engagement Manager at Climate Generation.
Great. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining our Climate Convenings Toolkit launch webinar. We're really excited to share with you all this new resource that we've been hard at work, mostly Josna's been hard at work developing, coming out of the work that we have been doing convening individuals around the state of Minnesota and the country around the issue of climate change. To start things off, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about our organization, Climate Generation. We are located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're an environmental nonprofit. We're 11 years old. And our mission is to educate and empower people to engage in solutions to climate change. We do this through two main program areas. Our youth program, which engages high school youth here in the Twin Cities on climate action and organizing around climate change and energy and climate justice. And then also with young people throughout the Midwest who are more in the college and 20s age bracket. Our education program works with K-12 educators. We have curriculum resources and professional development. We do a summer institute every summer. We're open for registration right now if you're interested. And we also do work in public engagement, which is where this project stems from and where this toolkit, the work of this toolkit comes from. We were founded by a polar explorer named Will Steger. And during Will Steger's travels as an explorer, he became an eyewitness to the impacts of climate change. And through his concern, he founded our organization 10, 11 years ago now. And one of the things that's really powerful about Will is his story, which is this eyewitness to climate change story. Now, 10, 11 years ago, not many of us really could say that we thought we were an eyewitness to climate change. But unfortunately now, I think we all feel that way. And those of us here in Minnesota who treasure the winters have seen a steady decline of what we would call a real winter. And others of you in other parts of the world and country probably have seen similar things. Because of this change, this idea that we could all be eyewitness, we have really used that as a pivotal part of our programming with public engagement, helping others also find their story and use that as a connecting point on the issue. And you'll hear more about that from Josna. This project, this toolkit comes out of our work in public engagement, which really started most recently through our Climate Minnesota Local Stories Community Solutions project, which convened 12 Minnesota rural communities around the issue of climate change, highlighting impacts and highlighting storytellers who were just community folks that had something to share on how they were acting on climate or seeing the impacts themselves. And then connecting those individuals and communities with the resources that were there in their community with some hope for action they could take. We're proud to say that this project received an award at the National Adaptation Forum just 2 weeks ago through the Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership because of its impact on local Minnesota communities and the work around public engagement. I'm going to pass it over to Josna, but just a reminder to you all that if you are on Twitter or using social media, you can use the hashtag #TalkClimate throughout the conversation today, and also, beyond that. And if you do have any questions, please use the chat on the side of your social media platform on the YouTube, or you may also email Megan, MEGAN, @climategen.org. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Josna.
Great. Well, thanks, Kristen. Well, before we dig into the Toolkit resource, I thought I'd share with you a little story, which actually really speaks to the inspiration behind this Toolkit resource. So for the last 2 weeks, Climate Generation has been monitoring the funding of a project proposal called Youth Convening Minnesota in our state legislature. And though this project had already passed through several major stages, including being recommended by a 17-person legislative citizen commission, when it actually came time for the legislature to finalize the bill, several legislators questioned the legitimacy of any of the projects relating to climate change. And listening to the debate on the sidelines was fascinating. I heard phrases like so-called climate change and the climate change scam enter the debate with legislators. Personally, I met with countless legislators one-on-one, and it really confirmed to me that knowing the facts on climate change is not enough, but that personal experience, identity, and worldview are even more powerful motivators. And so while we have work to do educating people on the trends, causes, and consequences, we also need to be able to move people at the personal level and in a way that really speaks to their value system. When we do this successfully, it will not only motivate people to care, but it also has the potential to empower them, which is what we need for sustained action. So I'm really glad that you all have joined us today for the launch of this exciting new resource. What we hope it will do is to give you the tangible tools to bring your community together to talk about climate change. But we also hope that it will catalyze deeper momentum. The Climate Convenings Toolkit is a 20-page how-to guide, which is part philosophy for our model and method for convening, but it also includes planning and implementation tools and templates. So at the end of the webinar, we will share details for how you can download this free resource from our site, so you have to stay tuned for that. But our hope is really that you'll be able to use this guide more as a scalable template rather than a prescription, so that you have really the flexibility to tailor your approach to the unique needs of your own audience. So to share a little bit more behind the inspiration for this resource, in December 2015 at the COP21 Paris climate talks, we saw the power of the international community coming together around climate change as nearly 200 countries forged this historic agreement. But what we often overlook is what happened leading up to that moment. That it really was the countless local victories that happened. So this agreement actually demonstrated the importance of investing in our local communities to build climate literacy and engagement on solutions. But really that local communities have the unique opportunity and potential to create an undercurrent of momentum that our leaders, our state, national, and global leaders cannot easily ignore. So when we're thinking about why climate change, the discussion of climate change in the public has been challenging, unfortunately, we know that the science has become politicized, and misinformation on climate change is making it more difficult to decipher which sources are actually credible. The data, trends, and impacts and solutions are often overwhelming. And the result of that is that the topic of climate change is really rarely discussed in the public in meaningful ways. So we knew that there was really a need to envision a new way to inspire these conversations, one that really balanced the science with the stories from the people who are actually experiencing it. And we also wanted to really communicate the positive message that there are still things that we can do. Over the last 10 years, there has been a wealth of research that has emerged. Research sharing things like information alone is not enough to move people to behavior change. Also, that ongoing peer support and specific measurable action items are important and best introduced at the community level through public forums. And that learning and action on climate change must involve a combination of engaging minds, hearts, and hands. But yet, what we were really observing in the field had not changed. We saw that presentations on climate change often emphasize the doom and gloom, and that when solutions were involved, they lacked a sense of personal connection, with the result leaving the audience feeling depressed and uninspired. So, thinking about these observations from the field and the emerging research that we were learning about, we also thought about how all of those things sort of melded together with storytelling, which has been central to our public engagement work. Kristen mentioned earlier that at the core of climate generation is the eyewitness account of Will Steger, who is a polar explorer, educator, and founder of Climate Generation. What Will's story did, it was not only a personal call to action, but it actually was a way to talk to people about climate change that engaged them, it sort of like enthralled them with this story of chronicles of Arctic adventures and this visual impact of what he actually saw. And we know that at the time that Will started sharing his story over 10 years ago, only really a few people were talking about climate change from an eyewitness perspective. And these stories from a few actually became essential for painting the picture of climate change for the rest of us. But what we now know is that, unfortunately, the times have changed. And whether we realize it or not, we all have a story to tell, and we are all eyewitnesses. And when we speak from the heart, delivering our stories with an emotional impact, they can also be powerful tools for building understanding. And so understanding how the emergent research and the challenges we saw of how this was actually playing out in our field, along with the power of storytelling, really informed the theoretical framework that guides our approach to public convening. And in 2014, as Kristen mentioned, we were able to test this framework through our Climate Minnesota Local Stories Community Solutions project. In addition to this framework for planning, we also found that there were some essential elements that should always be involved in convening and sort of building blocks for priming this conversation. The first was starting out with really creating a sense of celebration and community, and often this was began with a resource fair and refreshments and welcoming people into the convening space, including a trusted messenger, a community leader who is viewed by people in that particular audience or community as somebody that they look to as a person that they trust. And then building climate science, storytelling, and then solutions. And we found that the storytelling piece was actually a very important link, sort of a bridge between the science and the solutions, and making sort of this deeper inspiration for why we should care and be involved. And then ending with a fun reason to gather and continue conversations. What was often for our Climate Minnesota convenings a dessert reception, where we had people still come together around their local resources in their community who were offering solutions to continue their conversations about tangible ways that they could make a difference and actually meet each other and exchange contact information and stay connected. So as I mentioned, storytelling aspect was a way to really elevate community stories. And what we found is that community members, when they told their peers about their own experience, really changed the dynamic of the conversation, and it felt authentic, like the community speaking to the community. And it sort of, you felt this tangible shift in the room from hearing the heaviness of the climate trends and impacts to actually how real people in their community were experiencing climate change. And these stories that were shared at convenings often mimicked the emotional trajectory that works in tandem with how we often learn about climate change, so from loss to hope or despair to action. Another element that we felt was really important was sort of like developing this understanding that the convening itself was a deeper opportunity to inspire social cohesion and connectedness. And so being able to build trust and bridge alliances and bond with people was really one of the main goals of convening the community. We often don't have enough alignment and understanding, and so being able to strip away all of the barriers of the things that divide us and starting from a place of common ground was really important. And what we realized at Climate Generation is that as conveners, our primary responsibility is to really understand that the answers for creating the communities that we want to see are not held within us. They're actually held within the people who make up that community, that in fact, they are the experts. And so listening and learning about what they care about, tailoring messages and resources to meet those unique needs were essential. And I believe ultimately will determine the level of engagement that is achieved. The convening agenda, which is a template that you'll find in our resource, was really designed to feature local people and elevate their voices. So we had opportunities for people to engage in the convening on a leadership role, really in every aspect. And so we called these people the convening cast, and their roles varied from the opening welcome speaker to storytelling panelists, resource fair participants, volunteers, and solutions workshop facilitators. Integrating community members in all aspects of the convening really helped to develop this sense that it was designed to inspire social cohesion and this more authentic conversation. We also know that public conversations on climate change usually overlook the acknowledging that this emotion that often happens when we learn about climate change. And as people begin to understand the problem, its scale, and impacts that are already happening, there can be a powerful tendency towards despair. And so making space in the public for us to be able to find each other and collectively grieve is really important. We felt that acknowledging fear was essential before moving into solutions, so that people could actually start to process through some of those emotions that are related to climate change. So we developed some intentional questions that can be asked during convening that sort of prompt this understanding of how people are processing emotions. And these often included questions like, what do you value most about your community? In light of what you have now learned, how does that impact what you value most about your community? And after hearing stories from your neighbors, how do you feel about tackling climate change? And so we offered the audience opportunities to process that with each other and also reflect on them individually. This is an example of one of the tools that we had for people to actually report back how they were feeling about tackling climate change. It sort of mimics the pain scale that you find in the clinic or the hospital, and it's sort of a fun way to gather how people were really feeling, and then we use that as an informal evaluation after the convening was over. These questions we found were really important for people to feel and identify the emotions around climate change and to begin to process through them. to more deeply connect to the issue and develop more of a resolve for sustained action. Today, before we go any further, we just want to acknowledge that we were not able to touch on all of the aspects that are available in the toolkit, and we wanted to just provide an introduction of what this resource is and how it might help you as you're catalyzing change in your community. So again, we're really intending for this model to be replicable and scalable, and we hope that the toolkit will provide the groundwork to help you launch a conversation in your community. And what we've found is that convenings provide sort of an entry point and a foundation for which you can then layer other efforts on for longer term capacity building. So at this time, we have a couple of minutes for questions, and you can go ahead and email them.
Yep, so you can email them to megan@climategen.org, or use the side chat box that's on the YouTube. You have to log into your account for that. So we'll sit and see if any of those come in. And just a reminder that we are also really interested in hearing from you all on how you use the toolkit, and are available for consulting and helping with designing convenings in your community as well. When the webinar is over, you'll receive an email from us with an evaluation, and when you fill out the evaluation, you'll get directed to a link that has the information on downloading the toolkit. So keep your eyes open for that following that. And I think we'll just keep talking and finishing up, unless a question comes in. We'll wait to hear from Megan here. As I mentioned, an evaluation is going to be sent. When you submit it, you'll receive a link to the toolkit. And in addition, Josna, if you want to just sort of outline what else is in the toolkit.
Yeah, so you'll receive two download links, one for the toolkit, including framework, philosophy, step-by-step planning and implementation, how to actually take your visioning and implement it in your community. And then the other link will be to download PDF templates, and these are tools to help with mapping your community, invitations, the actual language that you can use to ask potential cast members to be involved, samples for an agenda, media, and evaluation questions, and more.
And there'll be one other thing that is posted to that page, and the that's on the web page that you'll be directed to on the toolkit. And in it is a GIS map that we're asking people to register their convenings, so we can see where they're happening around the country and around the world, and how you used your toolkit. And it's a really easy place to do that. You'll get directed to the website and choose register your convening, and there'll be a little form for you to fill out. And it looks like we had a couple questions come in. How might you go about measuring the impact these convenings have? So we have a couple examples of impacts on these convenings. I think Joseph and I could both share a little bit about that. We did pre and post surveys of the convenings, and those surveys were focused on climate literacy, so people's actual knowledge of climate change, as well as their social networks, and so how many people they could contact or have access to ask a question about how to engage in climate change solutions. And we had a pretty robust response to those surveys, and through them, the number of social connections that were made. So how many people could you call or email if you wanted to engage in some sort of solution, was a very high number following the convenings, which is a major goal that we, as Josna had mentioned, social cohesion is a huge piece of this, creating resilient communities or communities that are connected to each other. We also saw a change in people's actual climate literacy as well. So there was that immediate impact from that. There also have been some nice examples of ripple effects from these convenings. And we had a series of webinars last spring, which are all available on our website to watch on the climateminnesota.org platform. And those detail some of the projects that continued or were sort of elevated from that, including, let's see, I'm trying to think of one of them.
Yeah, so in the city of Rochester, at the convening, we were approached by local grassroots organizers that they had wanted the mayor of Rochester to sign a proclamation and announce it at the convening for Rochester to become a city that would be 100% renewable energy by 2031. And so the mayor agreed to that, and it became a great opportunity to really highlight what Rochester was doing. Local media came out, and it really became sort of this elevated opportunity to highlight local action. And since that proclamation, Mayor Brady said that he didn't really maybe think it through as much as he should have, and sort of was excited about the opportunity in the moment and had announced the proclamation, but maybe not everybody was sort of on the same page as him. But what he shared with us is what he's realized since the proclamation went out at the climate convening, was that it really set this standard, this bar in the community for people to reach to as they were making plans to redesign their city around the International Mayo Clinic. And so he said he sort of thought about it as JFK's statement when he sort of made this ambitious public announcement that the United States would put the first person on the moon. And after he made that statement, people were sort of scrambling around, questioning why he did that. But really what it prompted was people had to figure it out. And so that was one of the ripple effects from one of our Climate Minnesota convenings. And I think it just shows that there is this deeper opportunity to use the convening, not only as a way to prime this conversation for future efforts, but also to just elevate it in the public eye and have other efforts sort of work in tandem.
Great. Another question that came in, beyond releasing this toolkit, what else will you be doing to help enact more community conversations utilizing this model? Well, this is the work that we do organizationally and will continue to do. And so we, as I mentioned earlier, if you're an organization or an individual that's interested in putting on a convening in your community, it's something that we are always happy to consult on, or on a small level or on a larger level if you're interested in planning. We have, interestingly enough, we did have been seeking funding to do this, but using youth as conveners. We have found that youth voices are really powerful and important to elevate in communities. And this morning, actually, we unfortunately found out that project will not be funded through the state due to a lot of political backlash against climate change conversations. But we continue to do that work much in thanks to other funding sources as well, including the McKnight Foundation, which has been a huge supporter of our work. And I think our questions, we don't have time probably for any other. If you do have others, please feel free to email them today or tomorrow. As I mentioned, you'll be receiving a link just following the webinar. And we look forward to hearing from all of you and seeing you posting to the map of convenings, and hope that you have gleaned some new information, ideas, inspiration from today's webinar.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us, and happy convening.
Happy convening.